The most difficult part of the ACT reading test isn't the questions or even the passage, it's dealing with time. You just don't have enough time to comfortably read through the passage, go through the questions at a leisurely pace. You have to keep moving. Anytime you get bogged down, you're threatened with not having enough time to finish the passages, or at least having to really rush to get to all the questions. So managing your time is key. And one of the places that you might run into trouble with your time in the ACT reading is if you're spending way too much time reading the passage through. You do want to read the passage before you go to the questions, but you don't want to do it with a very strong attention to detail. You want to get the main idea. You want to skim. And you might have heard this advice before, skim the passage. You might have heard of teachers and other situations, but we never really explain what it means to skim. When you're skimming for the ACT reading, there's two things that you're looking for. One, you're looking for the main idea. Just what is this passage about? What is the main topic? What is its subject? And then you're also trying to look for the general structure of the passage. How is it put together? What basically happens in the multiple parts of the passage, the multiple paragraphs, so that later when you go to the questions and you have to look for a particular part of the passage, you'll know approximately, okay, this part of the passage was like in the first two paragraphs, so I'll go look there first, right? So you're not reading the passage at all with an eye for remembering details. If you can, remember details just from reading them quickly, that's great, but we're not focused on remembering much through this first read through. We worry more about the details when the questions ask us something that require us to then go into detail in the passage. We don't want to spend a lot of time, for example, just picking a portion of this passage. I could try to spend a lot of time trying to understand what's going on in this portion of the passage, but if they don't ask any questions about it, then that's time wasted. So when we're skimming, when we're reading through the passage before we go to the questions, we want to skim, but we want to do it for those two things, the main idea and for the structure of the passage. So what I'm going to do is just go through this passage. I'm going to skim it. I'm not going to read it word for word because that kind of defeats the purpose, but I'm going to point out to you the pieces of this passage that jump out to me as fulfilling those requirements, as getting us the main idea and getting us the structure. So skimming through this first paragraph, I think this first paragraph is a great way of getting the main idea. It begins the passage with two questions, which presumably the passage is going to try to answer. So how should the law treat a mentally disturbed person who commits a criminal offense? Should individuals whose mental faculties are impaired be held responsible for their actions? It's going to go on to talk more about that. So the first paragraph really lays out for us the main idea. So we know this passage is going to be about, as we'll see later, the insanity defense, about how mentally disturbed people are treated in the legal system. That's our main idea. So we're done in that case. So now let's go to the structure. Just kind of skimming this quickly. What I'm looking for when I'm skimming, besides looking at the first sentence, which is often an important topic sentence that will lay out the topic of the paragraph, I'm also looking for names, I'm looking for dates, I'm looking for things that jump out to me and trying to use that to get a perspective on what this particular paragraph is about. So we can see it starts out by saying over the centuries. We also see dates in this part of the paragraph. We see a name, Mcnaughton, I don't know how to pronounce that, comes up a number of times. I see the Mcnaughton Rule, which states that a defendant may be found not guilty by reason of insanity only if he were so disturbed at the time of the act that he did not know what he was doing, or if that he did know what he was doing, he did not know it was wrong. So right now, what I get just from a very quick skim is this paragraph in terms of structure is a little bit of history. We get some historical background as to what how courts have dealt with this issue. And we also see this capitalized phrase, the Mcnaughton Rule, and presumably this is going to come up later in the passage, right? So we barely read anything. I mean, we maybe read this first sentence, we skimmed through just kind of looking for key words, we see some dates, we see some names, and right now we see from the structure, okay, this is a historical aspect to this. So if any of the questions ask us about history or ask us about the Mcnaughton Rule, we might want to look here. So let's see. Mcnaughton Rule was adopted in the United States, and it remained the basis of most decisions of legal insanity for over a century. Okay, so this is just a bit more about how it came to the United States. Then we go to the 1970s, where they adopted a broader legal definition of insanity, so going beyond the Mcnaughton Rule, goes into a bit more discussion of what this broader rule is. Next paragraph. The problem of legal responsibility in the case of mentally disordered individuals is currently a topic of intense debate. So now, kind of seeing the structure of this, it's chronological, right? We begin with this historical overview, then we see how it's transported to the United States, how the definition changed, and then what the debate is today. And then it goes into more discussion of when you can use the insanity plea. And then we kind of have a wrap up. Despite the current controversy, actual cases of acquittal by reason of insanity are quite rare. And then it goes on to talk about how not many people have used it, and then we're done. So notice we've read this, but we really haven't read it, right? We're not really reading it to get the details. We've missed a lot of details here, but here's the thing. The details only matter when we have to ask questions about them or answer questions about them. So obviously I had to talk through this, so it took a while, but this process would take about a minute or 2 minutes, and that's about as long that you want to spend, maybe 2 to 3, depending on the passage. I would say, let's say 1 to 3 minutes is, with 3 being quite long, is really the maximum you want to spend reading through the passage before you go to the questions. You do not want to read through this word by word, sentence by sentence, trying to make sense of it as you go. It's just going to take too much time. If you had unlimited time, you can do whatever you want, but we have to treat this section knowing that we have limited time, so we have to do things in a different way. So notice we read this, we didn't really even go into much detail about it, but in this quick overview, just by looking at these opening sentences, looking for these key words, the passage, dates, names, capitalized things, we get a sense of the structure of this passage and the main idea. It's about the insanity defense. It's used over the years, and it's basically a history, a chronological telling of how it's evolved, right? We start from the 18th and 19th centuries, we go into the United States, we go into the 1970s, we go into the current debate, and then we kind of wrap it up with a final point about how it's used today. Right? Good structure, and now we're ready to go ahead and answer questions. To learn more about Reason Prep's SAT, SAT subject test, and ACT video courses, go to reasonprep.com/enroll, and you can find the link in the description below the video.